The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.
Good evening. Beginning today, Idaho's more than 2,000 dairy producers began paying a new 50-cent per hundredweight assessment on milk products. That new fee pushes the total assessment on milk producers to $1 per hundredweight, all of that added just this year. The new fee was imposed by the Reagan administration over the objections of the Congress and many dairy farmers. It's designed to reduce the nation's huge dairy surplus. At the moment, that surplus, in addition to a lot of powdered milk, includes 558 million pounds of butter and 685 million pounds of cheese. The federal buying and storage of all of that is, of course, costing the taxpayer a lot of money, an estimated $2 billion this year. The administration hopes this new fee will create a downward effect on production and encourage farmers to reduce their herds by as much as 10%. But not everyone believes it will work. Some argue that the first 50-cent assessment added earlier this year had little effect, and this one will have consequently much if any effect either. Others believe the price the government is guaranteeing to pay for surplus dairy products is too high, and cattlemen are worried now that if dairy herds are culled, the cattle market later this year will be swamped and cattle prices will plummet. Whatever happens, the effect will be felt certainly here in Idaho. This state ranks 17th in the nation in milk production, with 170,000 cows producing 270 million gallons of milk this year. Tonight, is there a way out of this dairy price and surplus mess? And is the new fee added today the way out? We begin tonight with an overview from Edward Fees. Mr. Fees is an extension dairy specialist with the University of Idaho. Why do we have this surplus, Mr. Fees?
The Milk Support Price Program was originated in the late 1940s. Its main purpose was to ensure products for the consumer at a reasonable price. Through 1977, this program worked quite effectively. From that period of time to currently, we've seen a large increase in cow numbers and total production. Because of that, we have a large differential between total milk produced and that's being consumed. Many would argue that adjustments in that milk support plan during the 1970s were the main culprit, creating perhaps an artificially high price for dairy products, encouraging dairy production to increase. There are certainly other factors that need to be considered. During that same period of time, in the last 4 to 5 years, other agricultural commodities have been depressed. And I think many farm families placed greater emphasis on dairy production if they had that option, or abandoned other forms of agriculture and placed all their time and effort into producing milk. Because of that, we have the large surplus, and it's primarily due to, one, increased cow numbers. We're at a record high in cow numbers currently, and secondly, also a large increase in production per cow.
I saw the figure just today of maybe 1 million more cows in the country being milked every month than really need to be milked. Is that in the ballpark?
Currently, we're over 11 million. And if you relate that to the percent surplus, that's relatively close.
How precisely now is this fee that went on just today, how is that supposed to attack that surplus?
Well, it's basically in two ways. One, it will help offset the cost of the program. But probably more importantly, it will in fact reduce...
Just let me interrupt just quickly there. Offset the cost that the government is paying to buy these products.
Yes.
Okay.
But more importantly, perhaps it will lower the price at the producer level in terms of the total dollars that he receives for the milk that's produced.
Now, as I understand it, the producer, the dairy farmer, can get around the fee or have it returned if he agrees to reduce his production.
Yeah, there are some provisions for those producers that voluntarily reduce production over a base period of time.
What effect does this have on the dairy farmer?
Currently, we have a lot of dairymen that are operating in a very close financial situation. Many of them are at or near break even in terms of cost producing 100 pounds of milk, and I would suspect that the additional 50-cent deduction will place many of those well below production cost.
So this is sort of the Finally, let me ask you, this is obviously right at the break-even mark for a lot of people. Force
Yes.
some out of business.
I think so, especially in talking to producers around our state. Many of them are very concerned, and many of them are at that point. There are some other underlying factors also. I think we're also facing probably increased feed prices, especially this fall. And I'm sure that will also impact the profitability of dairy enterprises in our state.
We'll come back, sir. Thank you. Let's get the view now of a dairy farmer and the president of a dairymen's cooperative. Dale Pline has been a dairy farmer for 24 years. He milks 95 cows at his farm southeast of Nampa. Mr. Pline is also president of Dairymen's Creamery Association, the state's largest co-op. How do you see the effect on dairy farmers, Mr. Pline?
Well, I think it will have quite a devastating effect because there are some factors which Ed Fees has already mentioned, such as increased feed prices that are also going to have quite an effect. But if you consider that $1 is about 8% of your gross milk value, $1 would represent about 8% of your total milk check.
$1 is the total level of the assessment now.
Right, the total level of assessment as of today. You're taking, if there ever was that much profit, you're taking all of the profit out of dairying. So the initial reaction of dairy farmers will be, as it was with the first 50 cents, that we're going to milk more cows in order to maintain our cash flow, which they have to do to meet their obligations. But really, I see that as false economics, because that dollar is coming directly out of your profit, and there's really no way that most of us can add enough cows to replace that level of profit. It just isn't possible. So really what will happen if you continue you're eating into your assets or having to borrow more heavily, and with the heavy debt load that many dairy farmers are carrying already, it's almost impossible.
So if I understand you correctly, you see the program working just the opposite of the way it's supposed to work. In other words, instead of reducing production, farmers will actually increase production to stay ahead.
I think that's the initial reaction, and I think you've seen that somewhat with the first 50 cents. But I really expect that you'll see somewhat of a blimp in production. It'll go up for a short period of time, but then when it really starts having its effect, I think you're going to see it turn around.
So what will this do, in your view, to the surplus? Will it impact it?
Yes, in the long run. I wouldn't expect any real short-term benefits from it. The people's initial reaction will be to try to survive.
Do you agree with Mr. Fees when he says that some farmers will give up, go out of business?
Oh, I think some farmers will be forced out of business. Some may voluntarily go out of business. That depends, of course, on what your actual investment is in the dairy business, maybe your age, maybe, I guess it depends a lot, too, on whether or not there is some future legislation coming from Congress.
Is this, am I hearing you to say that this is a bad idea on the whole, or is it as good as can be expected in this situation?
I guess as you talk to a dairy farmer, anything that takes away some of your dollars for living expenses is a bad idea. But we do have to address the problem of overproduction. And of course, the fact that we've spent about 3 years now trying to come up with the solution to bring production under control, I think it's a good indication of the frustration and the problem that dairy farmers across the United States have had coming to a uniform program to solve this problem. And the administration's had the same problem, too, of coming up with a really just and equitable program.
Well, finally, in your view, why are we in this situation? You heard Mr. Fees' historical view. How does yours look at this?
Well, I would agree with what Ed Fees has said, and also add that actually the last 3 or 4 years, feed prices have been extremely cheap. I think if you would talk to any dairy farmer that owns land and grows feed himself, he would almost tell you unanimously that it's really been cheaper the last 3 or 4 years to buy your feed rather than grow it. And a lot of that came about as a result of the Carter embargo on sales to Russia. As a result, that drove feed prices down. A lot of assets that were involved in other segments of agriculture were shifted over to the production of milk. And I think we have continued to see the effects of that. In addition, the economy turned down, which has affected the sales of milk to somewhat. So it's been a combination of things. And actually, the milk price support has been frozen since October of 1980. So I think really in the last couple of years, that really has not been the major thing that has affected increased production.
We'll come back, sir. Thank you. Not all farmers are convinced that the dairy surplus is really an industry-wide problem. Some think it's a problem of the co-ops like Dairyman Creamery. Vale, Oregon dairy farmer Dwayne Thomas is of that opinion generally. Mr. Thomas owns and operates a 150-head hillside dairy. He processes, bottles, and markets his own milk. Why is it the problem of the co-ops, Mr. Thomas?
Well, the cooperatives, the support system was set, like the other two gentlemen mentioned, to guarantee the farmer, the dairyman, an adequate income. And it did work fine for years and years until recently, through various circumstances, production did increase, cheap prices, and the parity in the price of the milk and in the support program keeping it, so it did encourage milk production. My problem with the cooperative part of this surplus situation is that where we don't see eye to eye is that we are in a consumer market where we don't have a surplus, and we market our milk to the consumer, and it's used and consumed daily. Where these large, and in some cases super large cooperatives take in huge volumes of milk, and what they can't do on the consumer market goes to the taxpayer. They've had very little regard, in my estimation, and to curb and to halt this flow of milk. So where they were, us independent producers here, we have to produce for what we can sell. We can't have an overproduction because we have to market it. And we don't have a ready buyer in the U.S. government, we have the consumer. And when she's full up, it's full up.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying you don't contribute to the surplus problem, but you're still paying that same $1 a hundredweight.
Right, indirectly we are. I have milk cows, and my milk cows are being milked every day, and my volume of milk is indirectly a volume excess on the market. But directly we've used a little discretion here and been a little more responsible in here that we haven't overproduced to where we can't sell our product, where the cooperatives, they have the market for it. They can take in the milk, and if they sell it to the consumer, fine, then it can go to the taxpayer. And this is built up and built up since 1977.
What does this new assessment do to an independent producer like yourself?
Well, it does the same thing to an independent producer that it would to a cooperative producer, in that it does bite right into the heart of the profit. This dollar is definitely the breaking point of staying in. If you're a marginal operator and if you have a heavy debt load, this could just very well be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So it's no different. But what we argue here is that this assessment is, I'm paying money into the U.S. Treasury while they keep supplying the CCC with product that I'm helping to buy.
It's the Commodity Credit Corporation.
Right. That I'm helping to buy this product, and they're not assuring me or guaranteeing me that they will cut this down and cut it out. So this could go on and on. So they've kind of taken an interest in my business to the tune of $20,000 a year, and I don't have any control over their business.
I see. Okay. Well, let me ask you this. What would be better than this? Would it be better to, for example, as some suggest, lower the price support level?
This is what we proposed, that Secretary Block wanted something simple. He wouldn't listen to anything else. He wanted something simple, effective, and that would do the job. And a straight support cut in the price would, one, automatically lower the price that the taxpayer would be paying for this product if we're going to continue to fill the warehouses up. And two is, the commercial man and the independent producer is going to take that cut just as well as the cooperative producer is. And with this cut, the consumer would get the benefit here in hopes that we can raise consumption at the same time. So
well, the level is now at $13.10. What would it have to come down to be effective?
Well, we're talking here $12.10 then. We don't want to have to take these cuts any more than we have to. But evidently it's necessary too. They won't hear of quotas, and they won't hear of bases and excesses, and they won't hear of any of these comments that have been proposed. They seem to think that this price is the way to do it.
We'll come back, Mr. Thomas. Thank you. Idaho Republican Senator Steve Symms, speaking last week in Rupert, criticized the federal government's involvement in agriculture, particularly in the dairy industry. Senator Symms said the only real solution to this problem is to let the free market operations rule the industry. But of course, not everyone agrees. Frank Crone is the manager of the Dairymen's Creamery Association in Nampa. Should the government just be out of this business, Mr. Crone?
Well, there are some unique features of the dairy business that I think requires the ability of the federal government to balance the supply and demand that's generated by the dairy industry. I appreciate Senator Steve's comments, but you know, there is a significant difference between milk and wine. Milk really doesn't improve with age. And that's the problem we have in the dairy industry. We have the cycles of the production at the farm. It's actually at its highest level at the time of the year when the consumer utilizes the least amount of milk. And when the consumer wants the greatest amount of milk is when the cow produces the least amount of milk. And so nature has created a cycle. It's not like wine. And the cows are not geared to produce milk in exactly the same relationship that the consumer utilizes milk. Likewise, when the consumer shops, she shops on weekends, normally 1 or 2 days a week. The cow produces milk that requires her to be milked twice a day, 7 days a week. Obviously, there has to be programs and facilities to accommodate that flow of milk into the market. And when we talk about the excess today, I think it's important too that we identify what that excess is. We're talking about 10 to 12%. That's what it is.
10 to 12% of the total production.
Yes, that's basically what our excess amounts to today. Now, it's too high. Dairy farmers recognize that across the country. I think maybe they recognize it more here in the West than they do in some parts of the country, but the problem is, how do you adjust it? Well, and how do you adjust it equitably?
Mr. Thomas says you fellows in the co-op business are part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Well, obviously, if Mr. Thomas hadn't elected to go into business recently and take a portion of the market, we would have had more direct sales to the market. So that's a pretty good illustration of the free enterprise system. He has the opportunity to do that, and he did that. And so the milk that we sold to his outlets now backs up into our plant and becomes a surplus. So who creates a surplus? That's the age-old question. This particular area here is a reserve supply of milk. A few years ago, we had numerous loads of milk flowing into the Colorado market to supply the needs of consumers in that area. Today, that milk stays in this area and is processed into surplus products because dairy farmers in Colorado have increased their milk production to the point now where they don't need that milk from Idaho. But as things change, there will be the day when that milk will be needed again back in Colorado.
Well, does this, finally, let me ask you, does this 50-cent assessment that just went on today, is it going to help to get at this surplus, even with all of the disclaimers we've heard about it so far up to this point in this program?
Well, I don't think it's going to have a major impact on it because it is not enough to impact this increased production of milk. I think we're going to have some things help that, however. The tremendous high temperatures we're encountering in the central states, it's impacted corn production. They've had some 4 weeks of temperatures over 100 degrees. Corn has died. It is not going to be harvested this year. The increased cost of cottonseed is going to impact the feed cost for dairy farms. I think some of those factors are going to maybe impact this production level more than the 50 cents assessment.
Okay. Well, let me open this up, gentlemen, and invite all of you to get back in when you want to, but let me go back first to Mr. Thomas. If I understand you correctly, you saying that these co-ops should have some responsibility to help control this surplus, right?
That's right.
How should they do that?
They should be, well, first of all, they should have taken it up upon themselves not to encourage this production, to have it, because they had a market in the government as the big buyer. Had they been manageable and seen this, that it was growing, and them being the major suppliers to the government, who's to stop it? We on the commercial market or them? I don't supply any product to there. And
well, Mr. Cron asked, who creates the surplus?
Well, Mr. Crone, had I not put my plant in and marketed my own milk, had I just been a shipper out there, I have grade A milk, it'd be class 1 milk, it'd be bottled up somewhere here in Boise, and it'd be drank. Whether now all I'm doing is taking the profit out of him doing the bottling, so we still have the same volume of milk.
Well, let me go back to him on this point of the co-ops doing something to control this surplus. Do you feel any responsibility in that regard?
Well, I certainly do, and I think every dairy farmer has a responsibility in that regard. We and co-ops have our organizations where we address these problems, and through National Milk Producers Federation, of which we're a member, we have been actively involved in generating suggested legislation for Congress to help control this problem. As a matter of fact, National Milk Producers Federation is on record of trying to curtail the advances in the support price program that were generated back in the Carter administration. So I think the record is there that cooperatives have been responsible, and they are investing significant sums of money in trying to draft new legislation to better control this problem. As a matter of fact, they are on record now of supporting a dairy compromise bill that does a better job of addressing this problem of surplus than just the 50-cent assessment programs.
Well, Mr. Klein, does your co-op in effect have a guaranteed market in the federal government?
Well, the government does support the price of butter, cheese, and non-fat dry milk. But I think it's important to understand that the cooperatives have assumed the role of clearing this surplus from the market. Very, very little of the surplus is moved to the government through independent bottlers or handlers, if you will.
Well, if I understand Mr. Thomas, though, he's saying that's an encouragement to produce. It's not?
Well, the price support program, and I think it's really important to understand that it is not only a producer program, it's a consumer program. As I think it's already been said, the wording of the legislation that created the price support program states specifically to guarantee an ample supply of milk for the consumer. The milk price support system itself is needed. The only controversial thing, I think, is the level of support. And of course, with anything that's government, there are political overtones to decisions that are made, and I guess we're all kind of like the Saturday morning or Sunday morning quarterback. You know, we can all look back and say what should have been done now, but at the time that those levels were set, they seemed to be appropriate. But certainly, I think it is still important to understand that the role of clearing the surplus has fallen upon the cooperatives. If, for example,
well, let me just interrupt and let Mr. Thomas get a word in on that if he'd like.
Well, I don't know exactly what he's saying. And is he saying that he is assuming the role in clearing up the surplus?
I think that's what he said.
Well, he's not doing a very good job of it by himself, because they done tapped my pocket for $20,000 a year in this to curb this surplus situation here of something of which directly not involved in. Me being on the market with my milk is causing a backup in his plant to go to the government with is that's not so. That same volume of milk, like I mentioned before, would be on the market, and if he didn't have the market to start with, then he should either have created that market or quit producing it.
You really didn't create a surplus for us when you took accounts from us and placed your milk on the market. You see, really, every dairy farmer is part of the surplus problem, and you recognize that. I was pleased to hear that, because not all dairy farmers are willing to recognize that. Everyone has contributed to the surplus, and obviously, if you weren't out there selling through your plant, in your bottle, your package to the stores, our product would be there. And so that product would no longer be going into the government
So you not
surplus
only
program.
want my $20,000 a year for this thing, you also want me to get out of business. Am I hearing you right here now?
No, we're just illustrating to you how we all share the market.
This is
We're
a
certainly
free enterprising system
That's
in
right.
marketing this milk. This isn't one big, huge socialist organization here. We're not one big happy family as Congress would seem to think we are, or as they have introduced into Congress
But
here.
who has the wisdom to decide who should cut back and who shouldn't?
We're not, support cut in the price is fair and equitable to everybody involved. It's going to hurt, it's going to cut into your producers, it's going to cut into independent producers. Everybody's going to take a cut and everybody's going to feel the pinch, and if we're going to get out of business...
Let me just get a quick comment on that about cutting the price support level. Would that do more to address the surplus than adding this 50-cent assessment?
Well, really what we're endorsing is the Dairy Compromise Bill that has been discussed by Congress, and that we're optimistic will be adopted when Congress reconvenes. And that basically provides for a 50-cent adjustment in reducing the support price. It provides for, and that would be used incidentally to fund an incentive program to reduce the price, to reduce the production of milk. And it also provides for a collection of a promotional assessment so that we can do something positive for the dairy industry too.
Okay.
And generate future sales by doing a more adequate job of developing consumer awareness.
On another subject, Mr. Fees, back to you just briefly. If dairymen go ahead and cull their herds, what happens to the cattle market this fall?
Well, culling certainly is a wise management tool, especially now when we're faced with difficulty in maintaining a profitability level in the total herd. There's no question that if large numbers of dairy cattle are culled, that it's going to influence price per 100 pounds in the marketplace. I think currently we're at about 40 cents per pound on slaughtered cows. I would guess that would be lowered considerably if there's a mass culling program with a lot of cows entering that market. So it would impact beef industry.
Mr. Pline, do you think you'll see dairymen culling their herds?
Yes, I think so. And again, it all depends on whether or not Congress is going to come forth with future legislation. If they come and pass the compromise bill that Congress will be considering after the summer recess, and this $10 hundredweight incentive to cut production goes into effect, I think, yes, you're going to see some pretty strong culling.
Got to go, gentlemen. Mr. Fees, Mr. Thomas, we thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate it. Mr. Pline, Mr. Crone, thank you, sir. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Idaho Reports has a new time beginning Monday, September 5th. Join us at 6:30 p.m. And that same day, McNeil-Lehrer News Hour makes its debut. The funding for this program is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Friends of 4, 10, and 12.